welcome to Mr. Mike's World. Who are you again? Alright, so Chapter 6 is about the Chinese, and Section 1 of Chapter 6 is about geography of China. And we'll go over this quite a bit during class, so right now I'm just going to go over. First, they would put jade on some graves of rich people. Jade is just a hard gemstone. Second, some Chinese people thought they could know the future by looking at animal bones. So they would look at them and make an oracle, which just means a prediction of the future. Third, China has the Gobi Desert to the north, the Pacific Ocean to the east, the Himalayan mountains to the west, and the Plateau of Tibet to the south. So Section 2 talks about the Zhou dynasty. That's spelled Z-H-O-U. And the Zhou dynasty, around the 1100s BC, they attacked and beat the Shang dynasty, and so they took control of China. The kings of the Zhou dynasty said that heaven gave them power to rule over the people. They came from the west and set up a new government, and they gave land to people if they supported the Zhou dynasty. And so they mainly gave land to lords, which are people of high rank. The poorest people were peasants or farmers with small farms. They were given a very small amount of land. Now this system that they had, it made things orderly, but eventually the lords started to not like the king, and they decided they wouldn't fight if someone tried to take the government from the king. And so eventually the lords would start to fight against each other, and by 481 BC, China had a lot of civil wars. Families even started to turn on each other. The wealthier the family, the more money someone would get for killing a brother or their father. And there was no government to stop these things. Now, pages 169 to 171 we will go over in class. But for now, I'm just going to go over the key terms. First, a man named Confucius said that the Chinese needed to return to ethics, which are good moral values. The ideas that Confucius said would eventually be called Confucianism. Second, there was another religion in China called Taoism, which said that everyone should live in harmony with the Tao, which is the guiding force of all reality, kind of like a god. Lao Tzu was the greatest Taoist teacher. Finally, legalism is the belief that people are bad by nature and they should be controlled by the government. So now we're on section 3, which is talking about the Qin dynasty, and it's spelled Qin. And in class, we will go over pages 172 to 175. So if you want right now, you can skim over that. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights. Shi Huangdi means the first emperor, and he was the first emperor of China. He created a really strong government which followed legalism. He also created the Great Wall of China, which was a barrier that linked earlier walls across China's northern frontier. This wall was set up to stop armies from invading China. Now we're finishing out section 3, and now Shi Huangdi did a lot of awesome things, but the government that he set up was really, really strict. And so after he died, there was no great leader to really kind of keep the government going. And so a lot of people just decided, you know what, these laws are too strict, and so they decided to try to take over the government. And so after he died, China kind of fell into civil war. Now in class, we're going to go over the Han Dynasty government on pages 178 through 179. So if you want, you can skim over that right now. Otherwise, we're going to go on to family life on page 108. During the Han Dynasty, families became very important in China. People were made up of 4 different classes. First was the upper class. Second was the second class, which was the largest class. Third was the artisans who made stuff for everyday life. And finally, there was the merchants, who was the lowest class. And you could join the military to go up to a higher class. Now, these classes did not necessarily mean that you were rich in the higher classes and poor in the lower classes. In fact, the second class was the peasants, and they were the poorest. And some merchants, which were in the lowest class, were very wealthy. The wealthy people, they had big houses and lots of expensive things in their houses. But the poor worked in fields for hours every single day, and it was hard work. They often had to sell their land. Now, this dude Confucius, he taught that disobeying your parents was a crime, and so children, they didn't want to break the law, so they were well behaved. The father was the first in the family, and women had to always obey their husbands. They believed that if the family was strong and people obeyed their father, they would also obey the emperor. And it was also much more respected to be a boy rather than a girl, because a girl would eventually marry somebody and go join another family. There was a lot of great art that came out during this time too. They were great at figure painting. And they also had great poetry, like the Fu style, which combined prose with poetry and was very long. And there was also the Shi style, and that was short and could be sung as a song. And finally, they started to become also great historians. Now, here's a fun fact. The Chinese invented paper. Yes, they invented paper. And they used this paper to create scrolls. Just a couple other fun facts. They also created the sundial, which uses the position of shadows cast by the sun, and it tells the time of day. It was before they had clocks. Also, they made the seismograph, which measures the strength of an earthquake. And finally, they created acupuncture, which is the practice of inserting fine needles into the skin at specific points to cure disease or relieve pain. So they basically just take a bunch of needles and stick it into your body, and it helps make you okay. Now we're on section 5, and we'll be talking about pages 186 through 188 in class. So if you want, you can skim over that right now. But otherwise, we'll move on to Buddhism coming to China in page 188. So we pick up the story when China is trading with a lot of other countries. And when they're trading with the other countries, they start picking up traditions from them too. And they pick up a major religion. And in the 1st century AD, Buddhism comes from India to China along the Silk Road. So the government was not doing a very good job, and violence in China erupted all over the place. And people started really suffering and becoming very poor. And so they started looking for a deeper purpose to why they were suffering. And Buddhism offered hope to people, because Buddhism teaches that after you die, you can be reborn into this life again. And so Buddhism caught on, and by 200 AD, Buddhist altars were even in the emperor's palace. This is an example of diffusion, which is the spread of ideas from one culture to another. And the ideas of Buddhism came from the culture of India to the culture of China. So that is all for chapter 6. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you watch it over and over so that you will do well on your test. Alright, I'll talk to you guys later. God bless.